The sky was the color of old copper that evening, the kind of light that makes the dust shimmer like it's holding secrets. A woman walked the road with 3 children strung along her, like beads on a frayed thread. The oldest, a boy of 8, kept his chin high though. His eyes wandered toward the horizon, like he could will supper into being. The middle child, a girl of 6, walked quiet, her small hand gripping her mother's skirt. The youngest, barely 3, dragged a cloth doll by one leg, the doll's missing arm swaying with each step. Their boots were tired, the leather split, the laces knotted with scraps of twine. The mother's skirt was clean but worn thin. At the hem her hair pinned up in a braid with a single silver hairpin. She had not worn it for beauty in years. Now it was simply the only thing she owned that would not break in the wind. The road led them into a town that seemed to be holding its breath. A row of low buildings sat against the evening light, their windows glowing soft with lamplight. A dry wind pushed at their backs. Inside the mercantile, the air smelled of burlap and coffee beans. She counted her coins on the counter. $1, nothing more. The shopkeeper looked at her the way men look when they think they already know your whole story. He weighed the coins with his eyes, then slid a small sack of flour toward her, without a word. "That'll do it," he muttered, as though kindness might cost him more than the flour itself. She took it and thanked him quietly. The children's eyes followed a jar of peppermint sticks on the shelf, but she did not let hers linger. Outside, the wind stirred again, lifting the edge of her shawl. That's when she saw him, a man on a bay horse, sitting still, as if he were part of the dusk itself. He was broad-shouldered, his hat pulled low, the lines of his face carved deep, like someone who had spent years letting the weather tell him who he was. He didn't speak right away, only watched with the patience of a man who did not waste words. "Where you headed?" His voice was low, steady, as though it could hold the ground from shifting. She looked down the road. "Anywhere there's bread and a roof." His eyes flicked to the children, then back to her. "It's a long road to walk with so little in your hands." The words carried no judgment, only fact. And yet, something in her chest tightened. The oldest boy stepped closer to her side, as though he could stand between them if needed. The man gave a slight nod, then touched his hat brim. The moment passed, and he turned his horse toward the other end of town. Disappearing into the settling dark, she found the edge of town easily enough, just past the church, where the road grew thin again. An old barn leaned into the wind there, its boards gapped and silvered by sun. The children were too tired to be afraid of shadows. They curled together in the straw, the flour sack tucked under her arm like treasure. She lay awake long after they slept, listening to the sigh of the boards, the rustle of mice. Her thoughts ran ahead of her, to the winter coming, to the boots wearing thin, to the silver hairpin, and whether it might buy them another week of food. And then she heard it, the slow, steady beat of a horse's hooves on the hard ground. They stopped just outside the barn. The silence after was thicker than the dark. She sat up, her hand on her son's shoulder. A shadow moved against the sliver of moonlight in the doorway. It was him, the man from the road. He didn't step inside. Just stood there a moment, hat in hand, as though deciding whether to speak. The bay horse shifted behind him, its breath visible in the cool air. "You'll catch cold here," he said finally. "Storm's coming before dawn." She tightened her shawl. "We've weathered worse." He gave a small nod, like he believed her. But his eyes, steady and unhurried, stayed on hers a moment longer than necessary, as though weighing something invisible between them. Then, without another word, he pulled the brim of his hat low and turned back into the night. The hoofbeats faded, but her chest did not settle. Outside, the wind began to change, cooler now, with a damp edge. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled like a wagon over a wooden bridge. She lay down again, pulling her children close. Sleep came slow, as it always does when you're listening for the world to turn on you. But in the back of her mind, The image of the man on the bay horse remained, a shadow in the copper light. Watching without asking, speaking without pushing. She did not know yet that this was the beginning, that in a land where strangers passed like tumbleweeds, some stayed, not because they had to, but because they chose to. And in that choice, everything could change. Asterisk. The rain began before dawn, not the quick kind that passes with the wind, but the steady, soaking kind that sinks into your bones. It found every gap in the barn roof, dripping in thin silver lines onto the straw. The youngest woke first, her small hand pressing against her mother's cheek. "Mama, it's wet." She sat up, feeling the cold creep in. The flour sack was damp along one side. She pulled the children close under her shawl, but the wind came through the loose boards, smelling of mud and far-off lightning. That's when she heard it again, the slow beat of hooves. He appeared in the doorway, like the rain had carried him there. "You'll be shivering before the day's half through," he said, voice quieter than the downpour. "Come, my wagon's close." She hesitated. Years had taught her the cost of accepting help, but the youngest's lips were already pale, and the boy's shoulders shook under his too-thinned coat. He didn't press her, just waited, letting the rain speak for him. Finally, she gathered their things, the flour, the doll, the shawl, and followed. The wagon was plain, the boards worn smooth by years of use. He lifted the children in first, then offered his hand to her. His palm was warm despite the cold. They rode through the rain in near silence, the wheels creaking, the horse's breath visible in the chill. The road wound away from town, past fields swallowed in mist. When the ranch came into view, it didn't boast of wealth. The house was 2 stories, plain and strong, with a wraparound porch that looked built for work, not show. A long barn stretched beside it, smoke curling from a chimney somewhere behind. A woman stood waiting under the porch roof, sturdy, with a flour-dusted apron and sharp eyes that took in every detail at once. "This is Mrs. Whitlow," he said as they stopped. "Keeps the kitchen running. Knows her way around a stubborn pie crust and a stubborn man." Mrs. Whitlow gave a short nod, her gaze moving from the mother to each child. "Get in before you soak through." The kitchen smelled of bread and wood smoke. The children were given seats by the stove, their boots steaming faintly as Mrs. Whitlow set bowls of stew in front of them. The mother ate slowly, her hands wrapped around the bowl for warmth. No one asked questions. No one demanded explanations. Later, when the children were settled near the fire, the man showed her to a small room upstairs, plain bed, quilt, a window overlooking the pasture. "You can stay until the storm passes," he said. "No rent, but if it's easier for you, call it payment for the peace your children bring to the house." She wanted to ask why a stranger would open his doors when so many others had closed theirs. But his expression didn't invite the question. Instead, she nodded. "Thank you." By the second day, the children had found corners of the ranch that made them forget the road. The oldest boy followed the ranch hands to the stables, eyes wide as they saddled horses. The middle girl lingered in the kitchen, learning from Mrs. Whitlow how to cut biscuits without wasting dough. The youngest toddled after a ranch hand named Tomas, who spun lassos for her and pretended to be caught when she tossed them. The man, the rancher, moved through his days without hurry. She noticed how the others deferred to him without him ever raising his voice. He spoke to the cattle like they could answer, to the land like it was an old friend. She began to help where she could, mending a torn shirt for one of the men, fetching water when Mrs. Whitlow's hands were full. Once, when a spooked mare refused her stall, the mother stepped close, whispering in the low, steady tone she used for frightened children. The mare stilled, and the rancher, passing by, paused just long enough for his eyes to meet hers. That night, she sat at the edge of her bed, listening to the rain soften on the roof. Her hand smelled faintly of horses and bread. It had been a long time since her work had felt like something more than survival. On the third evening, while she was folding laundry in the kitchen, Mrs. Whitlow spoke without looking up. He doesn't bring strangers here, she said, her voice flat but not unkind. Not ever. You must have made an impression. The mother kept her eyes on the shirt she was folding. We were just in the right place at the right time. Mrs. Whitlow's mouth curved faintly, though she said nothing more. One morning, when the rain had broken and the air smelled of wet earth, the mother walked into town to trade for sugar. Two men stood outside the mercantile, their voices carrying in the thin air. That's him, isn't it? One said. Richest man in 3 counties. Owns more land than anyone from here to the border. Never took a wife, the other replied. They say no one's caught his eye. She kept walking, the sugar bag tucked close, her mind stirring, like the puddles at her feet, back at the ranch. The children were chasing each other in the yard, laughter ringing against the wet fence posts. The rancher was by the corral, tightening a rail. He looked up as she passed, his gaze steady as ever, as though whatever he owned or didn't own had nothing to do with who he was in that moment. That night, she sat at the kitchen table after. The children were asleep, mending a small tear in her daughter's dress. The lamplight cast a warm circle around her hands. She thought about the $1 still in her satchel, the one she'd meant to save for the road ahead, and she wondered, for the first time in many months, whether there might be another road, one that didn't keep moving away from home. Morning came, silver and cold. Frost clung to the corral rails, delicate as lace, melting slowly under the pale sun. She stood by the fence, her shawl pulled close, watching him work the cattle. The bay horse moved beneath him, as if they shared the same thoughts. A tilt of the reins, a shift of weight, and the herd bent where he wanted them. He looked younger in the cold, breath clouding in front of him, sleeves rolled to his forearms. The children appeared at her side, sleepy-eyed. The youngest let go of her mother's hand and toddled toward the fence. The rancher caught sight of her, and without breaking stride, he leaned down, scooping the child into the saddle before her little boots even touched the frost. The girl's laughter carried across the yard. High and clear, Mrs. Whitlow came out with a basket of eggs, watching from the porch. He doesn't let just anyone up on that horse, she said, voice almost lost to the morning air. The mother didn't answer. She was beginning to learn that some truths didn't need words. By the end of the week, the frost had gone, but the feeling in her chest hadn't eased. She had stayed long enough for the edges of the road to fade from her mind. Yet she still felt the weight of being a guest, of holding a place she hadn't earned. That night, she found something on her bed, a small sack of coins, a pair of sturdy boots that looked her size, and a knitted shawl soft as breath. No note. She carried them downstairs, finding him by the fire, mending a bridle strap. I can't take this, she said, setting the sack on the table. He didn't look up right away. Then take it as payment. For what? For the peace your children have brought to this house. The words hung between them, warm in their simplicity. She felt them in her bones, the way he saw her, not as a burden to carry, but as someone who had already given something worth keeping. The next afternoon, clouds rolled over the hills, the heavy kind that made the air taste of iron. By nightfall, the storm broke. Wind rattled the shutters, and a tree went down across part of the barn roof, with a crack that made the youngest cry out. She was already pulling on her boots before the ranch hands ran for lanterns. In the dark and the rain, she helped brace the sagging roof, passing tools, hauling wood, her skirt plastered to her legs. Once, when the wind caught the lantern light, she saw him watching her, the rain running off his hat brim, not in surprise, but in recognition, as though he'd known all along she wouldn't stand aside. The morning after, the air was clear, the damage mended enough to wait for better weather. But in town, the storm had left another kind of ruin. Whispers to women at the well turned their backs when she approached. A man at the feed store smirked as he said, "Must be nice, moving in with a man like that. Saves you having to earn it." The words stayed with her all the way back to the ranch, heavier than the sack of feed she carried. That night, she stood by the children's bed and watched them sleep. The youngest curled against her sister, the boy's arm flung across both of them. She thought about the road, the cold, the hunger, and how quickly safety could turn to something else in other people's mouths. She packed while the house was quiet, just enough for the first stretch of the road. She would leave before the sun, before the children could ask why. But when she reached the gate, the horse was already there. The rancher sat the saddle like he'd been waiting for her. Rain from the night's earlier shower dripped from the brim of his hat. "If you go now," he said, voice low and steady, "you'll be walking into a harder storm than this." She gripped the strap of her bag. "I won't be the reason folks speak your name like it's a scandal. I've weathered worse talk than theirs," he replied, "and none of it ever put bread in my kitchen or laughter in my house." She felt the wind push at her back, the same way it had on the road when they first met. Only this time, there was another pull, one she couldn't name yet, but couldn't deny. He didn't try to stop her with promises. He just sat there, waiting, as the rain eased into the earth. She turned back toward the house. That night, the lamplight seemed softer, the air warmer. She mended a shirt at the kitchen table, and when he passed through, he paused just long enough to set a fresh log on the fire before stepping out again. No words, no demands, just the quiet kind of company that grows roots where you least expect them. The days lengthened, the air softening toward spring. Cottonwoods by the creek began to show the first green, the kind that makes you believe winter might be loosening its grip for good. She had just finished hanging laundry on the line when she saw dust rising along the far edge of the pasture. A rider. Not him. The man who dismounted at the gate was one she had seen once before in town, sharp suit for a country road. Smiled too quick to be trusted. He tipped his hat, without looking her in the eye. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, stepping closer without waiting for an answer. "I heard you've been keeping house here. Thought maybe you could use some real work." The way he said work made the space between them feel smaller, darker. "I have all I need here," she said, keeping her voice even. Now. He let his gaze wander past her to the house, the barn. "This place won't last forever. Men get lonely. They change their minds. Best to have someone who'll keep you safe." Her hand tightened on the clothesline, knuckles white. Behind her, the children had come to the porch, silent, watching. He stepped closer, his shadow sliding over hers. "I can give you a room, food, even for the little ones. All you'd need to do is hoofbeats." Cut him off. They came hard and fast, the kind that make the ground seem to answer back. The bay horse appeared first, then the man on its back. The rancher had low, jaw set. He swung down before. The dust had even settled, closing the distance in long, deliberate strides. The other man took a step back, words drying on his tongue. The rancher didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You'll leave now." The pause that followed was heavier than any shout. The man laughed once, sharp and humorless, but he turned to his horse. "She's your problem, friend." Then he rode off, his dust settling slow in the afternoon light. When the sound of hoofbeat faded, the rancher turned to her. The set of his shoulders eased, but his eyes stayed steady. Inside, by the fire, she tried to speak first, but he was already shaking his head. "I don't want you here because you need me," he said. "I want you here because I need you." The words landed with the weight of something long held back. She looked at her hands. Rough from work, but steadier than they'd been in years. "I don't have much to give." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You walked this road with only $1 and 3 children. That's not much. That's more than most could carry." Her eyes burned, though no tears fell. She had been seen before, but never like this. The next morning, the sun rose soft over the pasture. The children played under the cottonwoods. their laughter spilling into the air like it belonged there. She walked beside him toward the corral, not as a guest anymore, but with the sense of someone who had a place. He carried the same calm as always, but there was something new in the space between them. Not spoken, not hurried, but sure, by the porch steps. He paused and reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded paper. I had this drawn up yesterday. Your name's on it. This land is as much yours as mine now. Her breath caught. Why? Because home isn't worth much if the people in it don't belong. That afternoon, she stood in the yard, her hair loose for the first time in years. The silver hairpin lay on the porch rail, not as a last possession to barter, but as something she could keep simply for beauty. She fastened it into her braid, the sun catching it like a promise. From the porch, she watched the children chase. Tomas, across the yard, Mrs. Whitlow calling after them with mock sternness. And there he was, by the corral, one hand resting on the bay's neck, looking back at her, as though he could feel her gaze. The road behind her seemed a different world now. Its miles faded to a thin line on the horizon. This was where she'd stopped walking. This was where she'd stayed. And this was where she belonged. Asterisk in the West, the richest men weren't the ones with the most land or gold, but the ones who could see the worth in a tired woman with hope still burning in her eyes. If you've ever walked a long road with nothing but faith in your hands, this story is for you. Now, tell me, friend, from where in this wide world are you watching?